Welcome to True Crime Documentaries. Caroline Hensley, the seemingly perfect suburban mother, had a secret so dark it could shatter her family and shock an entire town. Her husband, Greg Hensley, a devoted man, vanished without a trace, leaving behind whispers of betrayal and doubt. Their son, Jake Hensley, a star athlete and the pride of Willow Creek, was found dead under mysterious circumstances that no one could explain. And their daughter, Lily Hensley, an innocent child, narrowly escaped a fate too horrifying to imagine. What happened to the Hensley family? How could the woman they trusted most bring about their downfall? Willow Creek was the kind of place people dreamed of settling in. Nestled between rolling hills and wide-open fields, it was a peaceful escape from the chaos of city life. The tight-knit community celebrated every small event, from school fairs to church picnics, and neighbors rarely locked their doors. It was the perfect place to raise a family, and no family seemed to fit that image better than the Hensleys. Caroline Hensley was a woman who seemed to have it all. With her bright smile and polished demeanor, she radiated effortless charm. She was involved in everything, leading the PTA, organizing charity bake sales, and always making sure everyone felt seen and appreciated. Her husband, Greg, was equally admired. A hard-working accountant with a sharp sense of humor, Greg built a successful career while still making time to coach Little League and grill burgers at family cookouts. Together, they seemed unstoppable, a power couple everyone in Willow Creek looked up to. Their children, Jake and Lily, were the perfect additions to their picture-perfect family. Jake, at 16, was an honor roll student and the star of the high school basketball team. He was the kind of teenager other parents pointed to as a role model, disciplined and kind-hearted. His younger sister, 8-year-old Lily, was the town's sweetheart. Bright, giggly, and full of infectious energy, she made everyone smile. The Hensleys seemed to have the kind of life others envied, but beneath the surface, cracks were starting to show, ones invisible to the outside world. Caroline's obsession with perfection had begun to consume her. She wanted to control every detail of their lives, from the clothes they wore to the way they spoke in public. Greg, often nervously, joked that Caroline treated their lives like a never-ending performance. Caroline's need for control began to feel less like love and more like suffocation. Her demands didn't just affect her husband, they extended to her children as well. Jake, though naturally bright, started feeling the pressure to excel in ways that didn't interest him. His love for basketball faded under the weight of Caroline's constant reminders that he needed to balance sports with academics if he wanted to get into a top college. Lily, too young to fully understand her mother's expectations, often found herself practicing lines for school plays she hadn't even joined, or posing for photos she didn't want to take. From the outside, the Hensleys still appeared to be the perfect family. Neighbors marveled at how well-behaved the children were and how immaculate Caroline kept their home. Friends whispered admiringly about how well Greg and Caroline worked together, seemingly sharing every burden without breaking a sweat. It wasn't until much later, when the truth about the Hensley family began to unravel, that people would look back and wonder how they missed the signs. How could they not have seen that Caroline's perfectionism was more than just an endearing quirk? How could they not have noticed the quiet tension in Greg's smile, or the faint sadness in Jake's eyes? By the time the Hensley family's carefully curated life fell apart, it was too late for anyone to step in. Willow Creek would never forget the Hensleys, but not for the reasons anyone could have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came on a quiet Thursday evening when Greg Hensley failed to return home from a business trip. At first, Caroline didn't seem overly concerned. She told neighbors that Greg had probably gotten caught up with work or had decided to stay overnight at a hotel to avoid the long drive home. But as hours turned into days, the unease in Willow Creek began to grow. Greg was not the kind of man to disappear without a word. Caroline's calm composure quickly turned into visible panic. She contacted the police, explaining that Greg hadn't been in touch since he left for a regional accounting conference. His co-workers confirmed that he never arrived at the event. Search efforts began almost immediately, with local volunteers combing nearby highways and wooded areas. Flyers with Greg's photo were posted all over town, and his story even made the local news. Caroline appeared distraught, pleading on camera for anyone with information to come forward. At first, the town rallied around her. Neighbors brought casseroles and offered to watch the children while Caroline handled the chaos. The Hensley home became a hub of activity, with friends and family stopping by to comfort Caroline and the kids. Jake took on the role of protector, trying to stay strong for his younger sister Lily, who didn't fully understand what was happening, but knew enough to be scared. Weeks passed with no sign of Greg. No credit card activity, no sightings, no clues. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police eventually began treating his case as a possible foul play incident, but without any evidence, the investigation stalled. Caroline's public pleas for help grew quieter and were soon replaced by a somber acceptance. She told friends she was focusing on staying strong for her children, trying to move forward as best as she could. Then came the life insurance payout. Less than 3 months after Greg's disappearance, Caroline filed a claim on his $1 million policy, citing financial strain. The insurance company hesitated at first, given the lack of closure in Greg's case. But Caroline pushed hard, providing documents and legal arguments to speed up the process. Eventually, the payout was approved. She used the money to pay off the mortgage, renovate parts of the house, and buy a new car. To most of Willow Creek, this seemed reasonable. After all, Caroline had 2 children to support, and no steady income without Greg. But whispers started to spread. Some people found it strange that she moved on so quickly, especially given the uncertainty surrounding Greg's fate. Others pointed out how calm she seemed after receiving the money, as if a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. It didn't seem like the reaction of a grieving widow. One of Greg's co-workers came forward with a troubling revelation. Just before his disappearance, Greg had confided that his marriage wasn't as perfect as it seemed. He had talked about feeling trapped and even hinted at wanting to leave Caroline. This new information cast a shadow over the case, but without hard evidence, it was little more than speculation. The community wanted to believe the best about Caroline. After all, she had always been their model citizen, the epitome of grace under pressure. Yet, as time went on An unshakable question lingered in the minds of many. Was Greg's disappearance a tragic accident, or something far more sinister? After Greg's disappearance, the atmosphere at the Hensley household grew eerily still. Caroline maintained her public image, projecting strength and resilience, but those closest to the family began noticing subtle changes. Jake, once a vibrant and outgoing teenager, became withdrawn. He stopped attending basketball practice and spent most of his time alone in his room. Lily, who had once been the bright spark of the family, seemed subdued. Her usual laughter replaced by quiet obedience. Caroline, on the other hand, seemed more determined than ever to maintain control. She threw herself into home improvements funded by the life insurance payout and insisted that Jake focus entirely on his schoolwork, leaving little time for his personal interests. She closely monitored Lily's activities, deciding who her friends should be, and even dictating which books she could read. Neighbors began to notice the growing tension in the household, but dismissed it as a family struggling to heal after such a tragic loss. The toxicology report raised more questions than answers. The pills in Jake's bloodstream had been crushed and ingested, suggesting a deliberate act. Investigators considered the possibility of suicide, but they couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. Why would Jake crush the pills if he intended to end his life? And why had no one in the family noticed any signs of despair? Once again, Caroline played the role of the grieving mother with chilling precision. At Jake's funeral, she stood stoic, comforting Lily and accepting condolences with quiet dignity. But some in the community began to grow suspicious. How could one family suffer so much misfortune in such a short time? Behind the scenes, investigators started to take a closer look at Caroline. They noted her calm demeanor through both tragedies, her quick acceptance of Greg's presumed death and now Jake's sudden passing. She seemed too composed, too collected. Slowly, they began piecing together a timeline, revisiting Greg's disappearance and analyzing Caroline's actions in the months that followed. Meanwhile, Caroline's control over Lily intensified. She kept an even closer eye on her daughter, isolating her from friends and school events. Some teachers voiced concerns, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. To the outside world, Caroline was simply a mother trying to protect her child after unimaginable losses. But beneath the surface, a darker truth was starting to emerge. Investigators were closing in, and the cracks in Caroline's perfect facade were growing. The tragedies of the Hensley family were no longer seen as a string of unfortunate events. Something sinister was lurking, waiting to be uncovered. The tragic deaths of Greg and Jake Hensley had left the town of Willow Creek in shock. But the community's collective grief was nothing compared to what came next. 8-year-old Lily was rushed to the hospital one night after collapsing at home. Doctors worked frantically to stabilize her, and initial tests revealed that she had been poisoned. Caroline, visibly shaken, stood vigil at her daughter's bedside, tears flowing freely as she thanked the medical staff for saving Lily's life. For many, this was the breaking point. 3 tragedies in one family were too much to be mere coincidence. Whispers began circulating through the town, and even those who had once defended Caroline started to question whether something darker was at play. Authorities, now growing suspicious, launched a deeper investigation into the events that had devastated the Hensley family. Once Lily had stabilized, investigators obtained a warrant to search Caroline's home. The police meticulously combed through every room. At first, there was little to find. Caroline had kept the house spotless, with no obvious signs of anything incriminating. But in the attic, tucked away in a dusty corner, they found a locked box. Inside, they discovered journals and notebooks that would unravel the story Caroline had tried so hard to hide. These were not diaries filled with memories or reflections. Instead, they were chilling records of Caroline's plans and actions. Page after page detailed her obsession with maintaining control, her growing frustration with Greg's distance, and the resentment she felt toward Jake's independence. But the most shocking entries described, in disturbing detail, her calculated steps to eliminate her family members. Greg's disappearance had not been an accident. Caroline had poisoned him, carefully timing his disappearance during his business trip. She wrote about how she disposed of his body, though the exact location remained a mystery. Jake's death, too, was premeditated. Caroline had crushed and mixed the pills herself, ensuring the dosage would be fatal while making it look like an overdose. What investigators found most horrifying, however, was her plan for Lily. In the weeks leading up to her hospitalization, Caroline had been testing small doses of poison in Lily's food, slowly increasing the amount. She had intended to stage Lily's death as a tragic accident, completing what she saw as a necessary step to start a new life. As they delved deeper, investigators also uncovered Caroline's online search history. She had spent hours researching undetectable poisons, methods to stage deaths, and ways to quickly file insurance claims. The evidence was overwhelming. It painted a chilling picture of a woman whose obsession with control had led her down a dark and dangerous path. Caroline had carefully crafted her public image while secretly orchestrating the destruction of her own family. When she was confronted with the evidence, she denied everything. She claimed the journals were merely fictional writings and that her online searches were just harmless curiosities. But the weight of the evidence was undeniable. Her composed facade began to crack as investigators pieced together a story of control, greed, and manipulation that had driven her actions. Lily, still recovering in the hospital, was placed in protective custody. She became the key witness in the case, providing heartbreaking details of her mother's behavior in the weeks before her poisoning. The perfect image Caroline had worked so hard to maintain was now shattered, and the truth about the Hensley family was laid bare. The town of Willow Creek was left to grapple with the horrifying realization that the woman they had admired and trusted had been harboring a darkness no one could have imagined. Caroline Hensley's trial became the most talked-about event in Willow Creek's history, drawing nationwide attention. The courtroom was packed each day with reporters, townspeople, and those simply curious about how a woman who had once been the town's golden figure could be accused of such unthinkable crimes. Prosecutors laid out the case methodically, piece by piece, creating a devastating portrait of a woman consumed by greed, control, and a desperate need to maintain the facade of perfection. The journals were central to the prosecution's argument. They were read aloud in court, their chilling contents leaving the room in stunned silence. Caroline's words revealed a meticulous planner who had calculated every step, documenting Greg's poisoning, the staged overdose of Jake, and the slow, deliberate poisoning of Lily. There was no ambiguity. These were not the ramblings of someone detached from reality, but the cold, methodical plans of a person determined to start a new life. The prosecution also presented Caroline's online search history, which included phrases like "how to make poisoning look accidental" and "fatal dosages for children." They argued these searches demonstrated clear intent and premeditation. Financial records were introduced as well, showing Caroline's application for Greg's life insurance payout just weeks after his disappearance, followed by her attempts to increase Jake's policy shortly before his death. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching testimony came from Lily herself, speaking through a child psychologist who had been working with her. Lily described how her mother insisted on preparing all her meals and giving her special drinks that made her feel sick afterward. While Lily didn't fully understand what had happened to her, her account was enough to confirm that Caroline's actions had been deliberate. Caroline's defense team, however, painted her as a victim of her circumstances. They argued that she had been under immense psychological strain from Greg's alleged infidelity and the pressures of maintaining the perfect family image. They claimed her journals were just a form of therapy, ways to cope with intrusive thoughts she never intended to act upon. They even suggested that Greg's disappearance could have been voluntary and that Jake's death was a tragic accident rather than murder. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The prosecution dismantled the defense's arguments, showing that Caroline's actions were deliberate and carefully planned. Witnesses testified to her controlling nature, her quick acceptance of Greg's presumed death, and her lack of visible grief after Jake's passing. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. Caroline Hensley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Caroline remained stoic, her once polished demeanor intact, even as her fate was sealed. The aftermath of the trial left Willow Creek forever changed. The Hensley house, once a symbol of suburban perfection, now stood empty, a chilling reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The townspeople struggled to reconcile the Caroline they had known with the monster revealed in court. Some refused to believe she was capable of such evil, clinging to the image of the caring mother and community leader they had admired. Others were haunted by guilt, questioning how they had missed the signs and whether they could have done something to stop her. Lily was placed in foster care, far away from Willow Creek, to begin a new life. Her innocence had been stolen, her childhood marred by her mother's actions. The small town tried to move forward, but the shadow of the Hensley family's tragedy lingered. Caroline's story became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of how appearances can be deceiving and how far some will go to maintain control. For those who knew her, the most unsettling question remained unanswered. Had this darkness always been a part of her, hidden beneath the surface? Or had it slowly consumed her, turning her into the person capable of destroying everything she claimed to love?